In Him, all families are blessed. Join our discussion on Fabric of Family.
I've got a great program for us today lined up. Hope that you'll stay around to watch.
Well, I want to thank you for joining us for what is typically our panel discussion on Fabric of Family. I typically have a couple of guests that I interview regarding a family subject. Well, today I have someone whom you have seen on this program if you watch Fabric of Family on a regular basis, and that is Jim Merle. Jim does one of our regular segments, Family Fortunes of Faith. Jim's good to finally have you here in this medium to be able to talk about something that's very close to your heart and to your family's heart and to those who love and appreciate you. And we're going to get in that in just a moment, but I do want to mention that you are one of the evangelists at the Ironton Church of Christ in Talladega, Alabama. You work along with another fine gospel preacher, Cliff Goodwin, who is involved in television programming as well. And you are the editor of a website, and I want to give you the opportunity to mention that at this time so that people can find that.
Yes, sir. I've been managing and basically producing the website of truthbetold.org for probably 8 or 9 years now. It's something I really enjoy. I try to have a lot of content on there as far as things that are updated, sermons and such as that. The main thing I'm focused on as of late is basically doing a little program. It's kind of a YouTube program, Your Daily Dose. And the intention of that, as we're going to get into later, is just to try to support and uphold people during difficult times. It's easy to have faith in God when things are going well, not so easy when things are hard. And so that program tries to entertain that idea. And of course, the website is a way of driving that.
And Jim, you're certainly very qualified to talk about things like that because of your own life experience. And that's why we wanted you to be on the program today, to share with us some things that have been going on in your life for some time. You have had a battle with your health in years past. First of all, let me just ask you this question. How old are you, Jim?
I'm 39 years old.
39 years old. And for those who are watching the program, you may be surprised to know that this 39-year-old man sitting here beside me has struggled with heart issues all of his life. Jim, what condition were you originally diagnosed with?
I was born with what's known as transposition of the great vessels. Now that was found within a day or so of my birth. That was in 1975, so technologies are not exactly what they are now. But it was found fairly quickly. I was blessed in that. And basically that condition implies that my heart operated backwards. It wasn't physically backwards, but just the way that it was hooked up plumbing-wise. It had my larger pump, which is supposed to take blood to the body and supply energy and such as that through the blood. It had my larger pump going to the lungs versus my smaller pump trying to power my body. And so because of that, that was something I could not live with in the beginning, and I had to have a corrective surgery to try to repair that.
Now, what kind of symptoms would that cause?
I was known as a child as what's called a blue baby, and basically for parents that must have been a terror. Even from birth and on throughout the months as I waited to have a surgery where I could have one, I would completely need resuscitating. I would turn blue, stop breathing, and such as that, and I would have to be constantly resuscitated through CPR, through breaths and such. And so that made it difficult on my parents. Of course, there's a lot of stress there. Your child could pass at any time. And even my grandparents at that time, they loved me, but most people wouldn't spend a lot of time holding me, even as a child, because they didn't want to be that person who had me in their arms if that were to have happened, if I would have passed away.
So were you diagnosed with this condition at birth, or was this something shortly after?
Within a few days, they had pretty much figured out what was going on. It was a matter at that point in time of there wasn't really a good surgery to correct that. It's a pretty rare condition. I had 2 holes in my heart that kind of compounded those problems. And so they kind of had to decide what to do. And they had first told my parents that there was no way to open me up. In 1975, it was unheard of to have an open heart surgery on such a young child. And so they wouldn't open me up. They wanted to wait a year. I was born roughly 8 pounds. At 6 months old, I weighed 9. And so I just wasn't able to grow, wasn't able to function. And so they were forced into doing a surgery for 6 months, which, by the way, at that time, 1975, made me the youngest baby ever to be opened up, to have an open heart surgery. So
I think that's a significant fact for those who are watching the program today, that you were the youngest child in the state of Alabama
Right.
to ever undergo open heart surgery. And
Right.
Again, you were how old?
I was 6 months old
6
at that
months
time.
old
I had
at that
just,
time.
it was just a few days ago. September the 29th was my 39-year anniversary for that. So,
Well, as you think about growing up and all, how did this condition affect you physically? And also, I'm curious as far as mentally, as a child, were you held back from doing certain things? Were you fully aware of what was going on?
a lot of questions there, but basically, as a younger child especially, I had no idea. I did so well after surgery, and they never predicted. There was only a 10% chance given to my parents that I would even come out of the surgery. Of course, there was no life expectancy without it, so they made that choice, and I'm blessed by that. But as I came out of surgery and as I began to grow, I can't remember as a small child being very aware of it other than knowing that I had very regular doctor appointments. I would go to these doctor visits. I knew something was special because when I would go to the cardiologist, of course, I didn't understand that's who it was, but when I would go to the cardiologist, there wouldn't be one or two doctors in the room. I can remember at times they would move everything out of the exam room into conference rooms or different places because there would sometimes be 20 and 30 doctors stacked around the room, all trying to see what was going on, trying to understand. So I remember that. I remember as a child having some restrictions as far as the doctor said, you can't run, you can't do this, you can't do that. But at the same time, my parents were very loving and caring and flexible. They pretty much let me do what I could. And I snuck around to do some of that, but I mean, I ran and played. I had a great childhood, just as any other child. You know, hung out in the neighborhood, played football, basketball, baseball, whatever's in season. And so I really enjoyed that part. But there were some restrictions. I knew that if I pushed myself too hard, even then, and my lips would turn blue, I would have difficulty sometimes breathing, get very fatigued easily. I didn't have the energy that every child did. But I had plenty. I had a good time, and so I was able to enjoy my childhood.
So this surgery that you had as a child, this was something that was only for the purposes of getting you so far down the line in time? It wasn't a permanent fix?
It wasn't supposed to be. It was considered at that point to be kind of a treatment, not a cure, obviously. And it was something they really didn't expect me to live out of childhood. As a matter of fact, one thing that happened a lot later in life, when I was 18, and the doctor had no way of knowing this, I had never met my transplant surgeon. As a matter of fact, in that day, he did the surgery, he saw my parents the next day, they had not seen him since. That's the way things are and were. And he happened, just by providence, I guess, he called my mother's house, dug in some old records, they hadn't moved, called my mother's house on what happened to my 18th birthday, and just simply asked her, uncomfortably, is he still alive? He didn't expect that. They didn't think I would make it out of childhood even with the surgery. Of course, she was able to happily tell him, yes, he's doing well, he's working, he's this, he's that. And so that was a great moment for her and for me. I had made it that long, and at that point in time had had absolutely no problems. I'd never taken a pill. I had some small restrictions that I pretty much ignored by that point and just functioned like anybody else.
All right, so let me get some clarification. When you had this surgery as a baby, was this simply a procedure to fix your existing heart, or did you actually have a transplant as a baby?
It was to repair my existing heart. They did something then relatively new, known as the mustard procedure. Now that doesn't mean anything to us, but it was a certain way that they repaired a transposed heart. Again, it was rare, but that was the procedure they had used on children much older or adults, and it's something they had to try on me at that point in time. Since that time, there's been another surgery developed known as the arterial switch. It's a much better solution. Had I been able to have that, I would have had much more of a guarantee of survival than I ever did. But as it turned out, I wasn't able to have a second surgery. I never needed one. That's a blessing. But at that point in time, that wasn't an option. Once the mustard procedure was done the way it had to be done, there was no going back. And so I was pretty much to live with the heart I had best I could.
Well, Jim, you mentioned how that if you had had this other procedure, perhaps you would have had more of a guarantee, and of course that implies that you're mindful of the fact that you could have passed at any time.
Right.
At what point in your life? I mean, was it a small child? Was it you know, a teenager? Did you come to understand the seriousness of your situation and how that life was just hanging in the balance?
As I said earlier, as a child, I was aware that something had happened. I was aware when I was 5 or 6 years old, you go to school, now you have some restrictions. But it really was probably more in my teenage years, I'm talking 15, 16, 17, that I realized what had really happened, and the fact that even though I felt well, I was never going to be, as we would say, out of the woods. There was always the potential that things were going to go bad. The doctors did an outstanding job of watching me, monitoring me through the years, and constantly teaching, updating me what to look for, what signs. As a matter of fact, I've said before, they named out, this will happen, this will happen, this will happen, this is how it's going to go. And they even had warned my family, my wife by that point, that, you know, before he's 40, he's going to have some very hard problems to deal with. There's going to be something that's going to happen. Whether it be a heart attack, that would be really, in that case, a good thing. Not that it would improve me, but that was the best case scenario, to have a heart attack. The other side of that was I could just pass.
Well, you know, I think about a young person being in that situation, a teenager, and did that have any bearing on your teen years? I mean, the knowledge that you were in a position in which your life was in jeopardy, and, you know, the wrong activity, or perhaps just by chance of the circumstances, your life could end like that. Did that not mentally have an impact upon you, or was it something that you just kind of accepted because you grew up with it? Or
I think, honestly, it was something I always accepted. There were some disappointments in life. This is just an example that leads to something, but I wasn't able to play organized sports, especially football. I wasn't able to play that. The impact, obviously, the running, the exercise, the endurance that was needed, I wasn't supposed to play. So I became a manager / eventually a trainer with the football team there in my hometown. And by that point in time, I had completely let go, I think, of any, in my mind, any real worries. And I pretty much went through the motions as everybody else did. When they ran wind sprints at the end of practice, which back in our day there were plenty of those, I ran with the team. As a matter of fact, at that point in time, the coaches would comment I was probably the fastest person, one of the fastest people on the team. I could outrun the running backs. But that's because there wasn't really any fear. I just didn't feel like I had anything to fear. I knew that, I thought to myself at least, the better shape I can stay in, the better my chances are. And so I worked out in the weight rooms, never really looked like it, but spent a lot of time running and doing things, not to intentionally take care of myself, but inadvertently.
Right.
I tried to stay active, and that really helped me. I mean, it really helped me survive for a number of years, I know.
so, what about your social life as a teenager? Did your condition have any effect upon that in any degree?
For me, it wasn't really any different because being from a small town, 1,800 total population, and being that many of those people were cousins or whatever, you know how it goes, those people all knew my background. They all appreciated and knew what I was capable of doing. And sometimes, you know, I would actually, even then, I didn't realize it when I was going through it. But I feel like at times I had a lot of people who came to me who had other issues, other problems, whether it be physical or whatever. And they would come to me kind of as a source, you know, to say even then, as a teenager, you deal with this, and here's how you deal with it, and I have my problem too. And so I think I was able to inadvertently reach out there, and that constantly helped me to keep a better attitude at least. And no one ever really, that I can remember, looked at me and thought I was broken.
Yeah.
And that was a big help. And that's one thing I've learned, that when someone is having health issues, or especially health issues, when you treat them as if they're broken, that's exactly what they're going to be.
Well, tell me about the day you met a young lady by the name of Jennifer, and how this encounter greatly impacted your life.
It really did. At that point in time, just to reveal too much probably, I had a lot of confidence in myself, pretty high-strung, honestly high-tempered, that type of thing, you know, wasn't afraid of anything. I kind of looked at myself, hey, if I'm beating this, no one else can hurt me. And so I kind of carried myself in that way, in a sense, not really that troublesome, I don't think. But
Yeah.
meeting up with her, we met at the Youth Devo, at the church, at my home congregation. She would say it was love at first sight. I would probably say that. I promised her within the week I was going to marry her, and so I guess that would have been the case. And we talked a lot then. I had set my standards pretty high by that point. I wasn't on the big active dating scene, not because I didn't necessarily want to be. I had standards. I tried to have standards. And she met those immediately. And so that was good. As she would tell it, though, later, I didn't reveal any of this. She didn't know about any problems. I looked as active and healthy, I think, as anyone. So she didn't know about this. She didn't know what she was getting into.
She didn't know about your past medical history.
None at all. None at all.
Until later on in the relationship.
Yes, it was much later. I can't remember exactly how that came about, but that came up and she found out. But
and what was her response?
her response was basically, you know, why did you let me fall in love with you and
Yeah.
you could die? Because again, the outlook, although the evidence by that point, time-wise and health-wise, was showing that things were great, they even reminded me much later that the condition I had and the way it was repaired, it would allow me to have a full functioning life and no symptoms. Most heart failure patients, they notice things like shortness of breath. Being transposed, that was never an issue for me. My heart was backwards. My problem was fatigue. Most heart failure patients, swelling, fluid retention. Not me. My fluid, my legs, my ankles, none of that was ever the case. And that was great in a way, and I continue to function even more than ever at times. But they always said, you know, that's bad because you guys, as they referred to me, you tend to take the turns for the worst. You're the guy that you're fine one day and the next day it's over.
Yeah.
And so I knew that. I understood that. Kind of accepted it. She had to learn to accept it.
And just to kind of go forward in time just a bit, the relationship with Jennifer grew stronger and stronger, and
Right.
that brought you to the point of where you two decided that you wanted to be married.
Right. We married in '97. We'd been dating about 3 years, been engaged for a year of that. At that time, I worked at a job. I loved building cabinets. I've been building cabinets since I was 14 years old. I love working with my hands. I was in supervision at a cabinet plant. Made really good money, but I worked a lot of hours. 60, 70 hours was not far-fetched. I was kind of the Forrest Gump of the place. I ran everywhere I went just to do it. I was still able to do that and functioned at a very high level at that point. And so, you know, because of that, we had kind of gotten to a point that things were just normal. This is just the way things are. He's fine. And so, you know, as we go through, it's always in the back of your mind, especially for her, that this is potential, but it didn't seem real.
And
Things were going
life
too well.
progressed on, you were working, you had children?
Yes, my daughter Juliana, at the time that I fell ill, was roughly 4. And so my son, by that point in time, he was very young by the time anything really came up. But nonetheless, what I've always said about that, my daughter knew me when I was still running, playing, rolling around in the floor. My son, by that point, never got to know that.
Yeah.
By the time he was old enough to know what was going on, I was sick.
Yeah.
16, 18 hours a day sleeping was typical. No energy was this life.
So at this point, are you able to work at all? You said you had to sleep a lot, rest a
Yes,
lot.
I had several years before, around 2000 to 2001, had began to preach. And I'd been preaching on a very regular basis for about 3 years. And I mean by that, filling pulpits week in and week out. Chosen to go to the Memphis School of Preaching, did that, now come back, and was preaching full-time in Philadelphia, Mississippi.
Well, what brought you down that path? I mean, what was it that made you decide, you know, this is what I want to do? I want to preach. I want to be a preacher of the gospel.
It was later for me. My brother's a preacher. My dad is an elder and such, and preachers go back in our family for about 5 generations, elders the same. And so it was almost a logical, typical thing to do, but it was never something that I was asked to do or you know, expected to do or anything like that. It's something I just kind of began to do. I had been teaching a teenage Bible class. I had tried my hand at song leading, leading prayers, and eventually I finally said one day, you know what, I've done everything but preach.
Yeah.
I'm going to do that today. And I did that. I felt pretty good about it and moved from there.
And so you're preaching, I assume in Mississippi,
Right.
For a period of time. But there was a day that I know is pretty significant to you because of some things that occurred on this occasion. It was September the 30th, 2006. Tell us about that day.
That day was an eye-opening day. Again, for that period of time, 30 some odd years, 30 plus years, no problems, no pills, you know, things were what they were. Just going harder than anybody. Even as a preacher, I've always said, I continue to stand by this, if I would put 70 hours to building cabinets, I would put 70 hours into preaching. God doesn't deserve any less. And so that's how I was functioning in Philadelphia, wide open all the time. We were at the house that evening. We were going to have some of the elders over for a cookout, and was standing there at the kitchen sink, you know, eyeing my grill, making sure it was ready, doing something, maybe washing my hands. And Jennifer saw me reach up and begin to feel my pulse. And I think the look on my face versus what I was doing, she stopped and questioned me. She said, "What's wrong?" And I said, "My heart's stopping," which that's not something that happens. Wow. It's not something that should happen. And it would stop for, I guess, 4 or 5 seconds, nothing. I was functioning, talking, whatever, but it would stop. Of course, you kind of don't want to believe that, so.
I mean, what is that kind of sensation did that give you?
Very, very strange, I got to say. It was weird. I don't know what else to call it.
But you knew something was amiss there.
Right.
You knew it was your heart.
And at that point, yes, absolutely. I knew it was my heart. At that time, I had no idea what that would be. But I've never been one to be sick, to go to the doctor unless I had to. This was a moment where there wasn't any argument. You need to go to the emergency room, let's go. I was fine with that.
So you didn't pass out or
nothing.
Have a cardiac arrest at this point? Okay.
It was relaxed enough. We called and canceled our guests that were on the way, told them where we were going, went to the local emergency room there, which was very small, and went there, called Birmingham, which is I had always done, calling UAB, wanting advice. They asked that a 12-lead EKG be done. The hospital there at that time only had a 4-lead. They couldn't do any better. They put that on me. The doctor who was literally sitting on the other side of a glass, was so terrified, and she admitted it, not just the look. She admitted she was so terrified, she did not want me there. She wanted me in an ambulance on a helicopter headed to UAB. They didn't want to handle my case. They delayed a while because UAB was trying to decide what to do, and eventually I was taken to UAB. And at that point in time, I'm still thinking, okay, so I've had something that we're calling a PVC, which is what it is. My heart would beat regularly, stop for any length of time, and then start back. One of my elders immediately came to the hospital, and he stayed back with me maybe 5 minutes, and he kept looking at the monitor with this terrible look on his face, and he finally said, "I can't watch this." He couldn't watch me flatline and talk to him. It was just so strange. He left the room. He went back out. And I felt that way too, but I don't think I was really afraid. I wanted to know what was happening.
Yeah.
Of course, we go to UAB, and I thought I was a champ. This is going to be more of a joke.
Yeah.
And things are going to be all right. I'm coming back home in a little while. And of course, that wasn't exactly the way it worked.
So what happened? What did they find out? What did they tell you needed to be doing or not doing? Or?
We go to UAB. They confirmed that, yes, you're having these PVCs. They confirmed that that was my first of these things they had named years before. Here it is. These are your rhythm problems, which I knew that. I remembered that. Here's your rhythm problems, and here's what's going to happen. And again, they were very good at knowing what was going to happen. Even though my case was so different, they would do tests, and because my heart was so, the anatomy was so different, they would come up with numbers that wouldn't look that bad on paper, but at the same time, they had no baseline. They didn't know exactly where I stood, And well, they questioned me at UAB. We should not have done it probably, but we drove, or my wife drove me from 3.5 hours from Mississippi to UAB that night. I didn't choose the ambulance because I wanted the children to be able to go. And they asked me, I walked to the floor, admitted myself basically, and they asked me after they had done some tests, they said, how in the world did you get in here? Well, I walked. We don't believe that. We don't know how that's possible. But that, again, that was my symptoms. That's what I was able to do.
Well, and you were about how old at this point?
I guess backing up, I must have been 32 or so. I don't do math well, but it was that 2006 date, something of that.
Well, so what did they put you on, a medication? Did they
at that
give
point
you some kind of heart device? Or
they did all that they could. They sent me home with a 30-day heart monitor. They did intend on me being home for 30 days. They did what they could do.
Yeah.
They wanted to schedule a heart cath, which for most people, heart caths are routine. You know, they're always dangerous, but they're routine. But for me, they said, we will not begin to touch you because of your anatomy until, as they put it, they simplified it, but they said, we want a plumbing team, an electrical team, and an open heart team in the room before we'll do it. And so because of that, the cath was very difficult to schedule. They first said it would be about 3 months before I could get the cath to get everybody in the room. Of course, with the heart monitor, it wasn't but a matter of weeks or so that passed. I'm in a town about 45 minutes from Philadelphia, doing some visiting in the hospitals, functioning like I wanted to. And my wife calls in a panic, and she said, UAB just called. You're having VTAC, ventricular tachycardia, and they want you there now. And of course, they explained that later. They said that's the rhythm of death. If this is sustained more than a few seconds, you're going to drop, and that's it. They could, you know, shock you back, resuscitate, but that's not going to happen on the street.
Yeah.
And so, you know, I knew then things were really serious. But again, I hadn't had a heart cath yet. They get me over, they push the heart cath, they get it done. You know, I'm supposed to be back for 45 minutes. I'm in there 4.5 hours. The doctors who told my wife, as soon as he's done, you're coming to recovery, that didn't happen. They come in and all they'll tell at that point is, we want to wait till he's awake. And I don't know what that means. But they come in the room then and said, you know, you're bad. There's nothing that we can do. You're going to need a transplant. And we've got to start evaluating you right now for that process. And so that was tougher.
At that point in time, you had never contemplated a transplant?
It had been named on that list of these 5 or 6 things. That was there.
Yeah.
But, you know, to admit that I was in heart failure, I kind of had skipped. I had taken a stress test, a running treadmill stress test a few weeks before, and bragged with the ladies that morning that they needed to call their husband and tell them they'd be late because I was still going to be running at 4 o'clock that afternoon. After a few minutes, I literally flew off the back of the treadmill. I didn't have it. And I still wasn't ready to admit that, but the cath proved it. My numbers were pitiful. They didn't know what baseline should be, but I was well below it.
Well, you know, and to get on a transplant list, I'm sure there's a process, and there's time involved, and evaluations, and that, you know, certainly a heart transplant is something that wasn't going to just happen necessarily overnight.
Right.
So they had to sustain you in other ways, through medications?
They ended up, medications were some help. I continued to function again. I preached every Sunday, kept doing what I was doing. I ended up in a gospel meeting up around your area. I was in Tuscumbia, Alabama. I preached a Sunday to Friday meeting that week at the Spring Valley Church. And on Friday night, I ended up in the emergency room immediately after services. Of course, nobody there knew it. I took off there because I knew what was happening. And they ended up rushing me from there. They put in a pacemaker / defibrillator at that point that they had already scheduled, but it wasn't happening. And rhythms were so far off, VTAC was there. They had to do it. And so now I'm stacked up against, I've got a defibrillator that's going to protect me a little bit, pacemaker that's going to keep my heart in rhythm. And transplant is inevitable, but there's no time frame on that yet. I'm just being evaluated. So.
Okay, but you did get to a point to where you got bumped up on the list. It was a matter of life and death. You had to have it. I mean, the doctor come to you and basically say, Jim, you know, if you don't get this transplant within this time, you're not going to be here.
Right. I was eventually evaluated 4 times. The first 3, I was so borderline at one point. 2 of my doctors actually argued loudly. After a decision had been made to list me, they argued about listing me or not, because you want to push these things back as far as you can. Technologies get better, medications get better. As far as you can push a transplant, that adds days to the other side, is, you know, supposedly. And so we're pushing it back. By the time I'm finally evaluated for the 4th time, which was actually a number of years later, I had done pretty well, you know, made it. By the time they listed me then, I was put on a 24-hour IV medication. I wore in a fanny pack around my waist. And, you know, that was going to be my new life. Home health coming out. So you're facing that every day. Confined to the home, very blessed though. Moved back to Alabama during that time. Because of that, I had 2 strokes, which are just the rhythm problems, throwing clots, whatever. But we moved back to Alabama. I'm still preaching week in, week out by appointment invitation.
Yeah, I think a
just
lot
surviving.
of people in a situation like that, Jim, would have just been ready to give up on everything, but you didn't. I mean, you continued to the best of your ability to preach, to be a father, husband. You know, what was it that was that driving force there?
There was a driving force. Now, I'll admit, there was one week right after hearing that initial transplant news, without this, you're not going to survive. There was one week in there that I went back home, and I got in my lazy boy, and I sat there for a week. And I don't think it was depression. It was a matter of, I don't want to test this. I don't want to push things too far. I got to be here somehow. Yeah. And then after that week, I pretty much decided, you know what, I don't want to live that life either. You know, my children, my wife, you know.
Yeah. So you had to make a decision to press on regardless.
I did. And, you know, that happened between Sundays.
Yeah.
And so I kept doing that. And I always told everybody, and I meant it, if I have to sleep all week and preach on Sunday, I'm happy.
Yeah.
And my wife said, you know, hey, if you just wake up and talk to me every now and then, I'm good with that too. So that's what I did. It allowed me a lot of extra time to study. That was a blessing. You know, when you sit in a chair most of your days, you can utilize that time, and I was able to do that. But
well, let's move forward in time. May 15th, 2013. That was a important day for you and your family. What happened on that occasion, or what were the circumstances?
It was. I had been on that IV med for 10 months. Had continued to preach. I had been condemned. That's the word we use. Transplant guys condemned to the hospital on May the 2nd. At that point, they said, "You will go home with a transplant, or you won't go home." And that's the day you know you're going to face. They immediately upped my medications. They pulled some tricks out of the hat to try to get me as high on the list as possible. I was at that point, I was listed, but I was a status 1B. I need to be a status 1A. I'd been waiting 250 some odd days, not had any hits, no threats of a transplant. But on May the 15th, they came in that morning fairly early and told me I was NPO, which means no food or drink until further notice. And what that equates for a transplant person is there's a heart potentially out there. So that day was extremely long. I was surrounded by family and friends. I don't know, it was on a Wednesday. I don't know that a preacher in 100 miles, you know, hardly got home in time for services that day. They were there with me, and I appreciate that. But we waited all day. There were 3 men on the floor, 3 people who were potentials that day, similar boats as I was. And at the end of the day, a nurse walks in. We've been told all day, this is working, this is a match. We're just waiting on the doctors, waiting on this. And it's going to happen. The nurse walks in and just simply opens the door and said, "It's not yours." And when she said that, I think I just kind of shrugged it, you know, big deal. But that's not the reaction of everybody else. Everybody else dropped their head and parted ways. I encouraged my wife, children, parents, just go on home. And so I just basically dealt with that the way I could. I had been doing, I referred to much earlier, the daily dose. I'd been doing that. I let them get out of there within about an hour. I did a daily dose and that I entitled God's Will. Because I knew, you know, somehow that was His will. And I was blessed. The man who got the heart, who was in the same unit I was able to shake his hand on the way to surgery. You know, so that helped me a lot.
Yeah. Well, that was a great disappointment, I know, for your family and for you. You know, the excitement and that this day has finally come is here, and then, you know, you get the news. It's not yours. But there was another call that came.
That's right. It was exactly, technically the call came a week later, within a matter of hours. It was right at during worship time at Ironton, so I knew where all my friends and family were. And if they hadn't been there, they had a problem. But
Yeah.
they were all at worship, and I got the same word, your MPO to further notice. It's on May the 22nd, 2013. And we knew there was a potential heart there. By that time, the one had been transplanted, the other had received a ventricular assist device, a VADS device, so he was off the list temporarily. So I was the man in that hospital that was a candidate, and I was matching quickly. They were discovering matches. I texted everybody I knew that might have a phone turned on. Eventually, Cliff Goodwin he first saw the text and showed it to my wife. Of course, thanks be to God, they were at worship Bible class that time, and of course they shared that news very quickly, had a prayer, and services concluded. My family took off toward UAB to be with me. That went on all night, waiting, still in the back of my mind, wanting to be assured this was it, but saying if it's not, it's not. You know, I've only waited an extra week. Who knows? And typically a transplant guy, he misses 3-4 hearts, you know, before, if anything comes, and a lot don't survive. So I was thankful to have a chance. And it was about 5 o'clock the next morning. Of course, when they come and give you your first dose of immune suppressants, you know they know something, because they don't give you those until you need them. And they give me that maybe 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. By 5 o'clock, I'm taking the pre-op. You know things are a go. You still don't know what the future holds, but you know they're a go.
Yeah, and so they went in and did the surgery. I assume it was a good match.
Right.
That surgery took place on, was it?
The 23rd. It was technically on the 23rd, May the 23rd of 13. They took me into pre-op, had me there. It was kind of leaked where the heart was coming from location-wise. And the doctors told me, he said, we're going to take you into surgery. We believe there's going to be a lot of scar tissue. It's going to be a really, really hard surgery. They expected 12 to 14 hours. They tell me they're going to take me into surgery. I asked the doctor point blank. I said, what do you mean you're going to take me in, you know, start? I said, you taking me to the point of no return? He hesitated. He looked at me and said, yes. And so I knew by that my heart was coming out. And I would be laying there at the mercy of a heart coming, what turned out to be from Oklahoma, on a jet to get there successfully and to be a match and to be viable, which is all in the air.
So what goes through your mind, Jim, when you know that your heart's coming out, it's a point of no return, and there's always a possibility that you wouldn't return?
At that point in time, still, I was actually shocked at myself. I wasn't in a panic. Now, everybody around was. I mean, we'd had people, Cliff and Beth, they had come over, several others had come over at 2 o'clock in the morning, you know, and been there with us. And so that was great. My wife got to a point, she was standing on the wall and she started to slide down. She was about to pass out. And, you know, so they had to help her a little bit and that kind of thing. But I really did not panic. I had always had a nightmare that I was going to be so afraid. And when they started to roll me to surgery, and UAB is huge. I mean, it's a mile to the operating room, seemingly. Every corner we turned, I thought, I'm fixing to jump off the bed and run away.
Yeah.
I would rather live like I am than chance losing my life in the next few hours. I never did that. When the doors opened, I saw the largest operating room I've ever seen. All the lights, not a moment of panic.
Well, so you have a new heart, Jim. A new outlook on life, I guess, a new prospect of living a full life.
Right. Everything has been absolutely great. I've met my donor family, which is a plus. The match has been extremely, nearly perfect. The providence of God. That May the 15th heart wasn't mine. That was the quote. That is true. The May the 23rd heart was obviously mine. I've matched blood type necessary, tissue type necessary, but I've matched down to the individual antibodies and childhood illnesses. So much so they're doing a special study on me now to try to see how this match is so perfect. This man has no relation, no blood kinship. how is this match so perfect? How am I doing so well? I've had no rejection, no infection, no problems. I've been wide open, preaching since that day, and things have been great.
Well, Jim, I mean, obviously you're very active. You're preaching in meetings. You're helping us with this program, doing a segment for us, Family Fortunes of Faith. I mean, you're just very active, very involved, and you're an inspiration to so many people. But there's got to be some things, some lessons that you want to draw out of this situation that would be helpful for those of us who are watching the program today. Things that we can learn from the experience that you've gone through.
Right. I learned to understand several different scriptures. I'll just reference them a little bit. But when the Apostle Paul writes to the Corinthians, though the inward man or outward man should perish, the inward man is renewed day by day. I knew what that meant. I understood that. I didn't care so much that my body was failing. I knew what I was getting every day. And then I understood also Paul writing to the Philippians about being in a strait betwixt two, because I was happy to go on. I thought myself to be, faithful and to, been obedient in order to be saved. But at the same time, I just wanted to see my children grow up. I wanted to be with my wife. So that was something I constantly dealt with. But I also learned, and I can't explain this other than someone could read it, but if you go to Isaiah chapter 50, read verses 10 and 11, I learned to not light her on fire. Let God's way work itself out. You can push. I fussed, I fought, I begged, I pleaded, I tried everything to get care, to get healing physically. None of that worked until God worked it out. And when He did, everybody's comment's the same.
And we don't ever know
unbelievable what's occurred.
How that's going to unfold. I mean, in your situation, you probably had some ideas along the way of this would happen, and then it didn't happen.
Never happened. Everything I tried, and it came down to so many other facets aside from my health, insurance things, all of that, financial difficulties, all of that worked out, but it worked out in God's time and by His ways.
I think about Romans 8:28.
That's exactly right.
All things work together for good to them that love God and to them who are called according to His purpose.
That's definitely been my blessing in life. And I would not, I've said this, everybody that's ever talked to me, ask any questions. If I could go back through the same process again, I would do it in a moment. And I would face it the same way, I think, because it really has caused me to be able to grow. And I know any trial can do that.
Yeah.
And it's not that I was perfect through it.
Right.
It's just the fact that after I come out of it, sometimes during, but after I come out especially, I can look back and see all the blessings. I mean, I'm so blessed. The way that I preach, the way that I deliver sermons, the response that I get to God's Word, which is what matters, but because I'm the messenger of it, the spokesman, the response I get is a lot of times so different from what everybody else gets. I can talk to people on different levels, people who are dealing with troubles and facing death in a whole different way. And they tell me that, and I try to use that. I try to take advantage of it.
Well, Jim, one more question I want to ask you, and then our time will be up. But you think about the church, and I know that's so important to you and was important to you through this whole process. Looking back on your own experience, what can the church or Christians do to help someone, a family, an individual who's going through a trial like what you went through, perhaps even a life-threatening trial? What can we do, or what should we not do? What might hurt the situation? Just what are your thoughts about that?
The obvious one is just support those people. A lot of times it is the case that preachers, elders, those people are given a little bit more attention than, for lack of better terms, the typical member. And so sometimes people fall by the wayside. I got a lot of attention because I was able to place myself through the internet and such I hate to put it this way, but it's what it was, in the spotlight. I was able to access things. I had preached so many places, through the years, 80 plus congregations by that point I'd been in and preached. All those people knew something about me. And so I got attention. Yeah. Not everybody gets that, but everybody needs support. That comes financially sometimes. Mine has and does and did. It comes obviously emotionally, but it comes spiritually. You know, they need to be reminded that God is on their side. And even though they say they know that, actually functioning under that is a lot harder to do. And Christians, churches can do that.
Yeah.
Just don't turn a blind eye to anybody. And you know, there are people who have had ingrown toenails who have had harder times than I have because they didn't have the church to support them. And if that's their first trial in life, their biggest trial, it's a big deal. You know, death for somebody is a big deal. Heart transplant's a big deal. But having a cold is a big deal if that family, that person hasn't faced that yet and they haven't been able to grow through the process. So always pay attention to what's going on around you and support them every way you can.
Well, Jim, I want to thank you for being on the program today and sharing with us your story. And you are a great inspiration to so many people. And none of us know how long we're going to be here on this earth. You didn't know that as you were going through this process, but I mean, none of us do. But I am so thankful to God that He has given us Jim Merle for another day. And I don't know how long you'll be here on this earth, but I'm thankful to God that you're here. You're doing a great work. You're an inspiration to others, and we wish you well. And we look forward to hearing many more great things about the work that you're doing, Jim Merle. Thank you so much.
I'm so blessed. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, that's all the time that we have for our program today. And my, oh my, what a fascinating and an inspirational story that Jim has shared with us this week as well as last week in the interview. Fabric of Family is brought to you by Churches of Christ in your area. And in fact, there are a number of congregations that support the program on a regular basis. And some of these are going to be scrolling down the screen in just a moment. We hope that you'll take time to visit with a Church of Christ in your area. And I know that any of these supporting congregations would love to have you to come and visit with them at your first opportunity. The program is brought to you by the Jackson Heights Church of Christ in Florence, Alabama. And we have a free Bible correspondence course that we would love to send out to you. In fact, you can take it online, and there's some information there on the screen that will provide you the contact information for doing that. Or if you would prefer, you can certainly take it by mail. And so you'll need to contact us at the Jackson Heights Church of Christ, and we'll get you started on that. Fabric of Family, a program designed to address biblical needs of the family. We hope you'll join us next week.